Hello and welcome to the strange world of New Zealand, UFO Encounters. And today marks the end of our crazy journey into the strange world of New Zealand. Over the past couple months we have looked at quite a few varying topics within the paranormal. At the start we encountered cryptids reportedly living on the island, then moved to acquaint ourselves with the local ghosts and spirits, and finally we looked at a few locations that housed more than they seemed. It certainly has been an incredibly long journey, but I greatly appreciate my fan Richard Blackburn for suggesting the topic, as it has allowed me to look deeply into the lore of an area I may not have thought about covering. Today our video topic is going to revolve around UFO encounters that have been reported throughout the years. New Zealand in particular has had a vast history of anomalous UFO encounters dating back to the 1900s up until present day. Mainly these sightings come in the way of strange lights that have been reported by all walks of life, including civilians, air traffic controllers, pilots, as well as police officers. In one case, there were mentionings of strange beings that were seen, but it appears to be an uncommon occurrence, and it possibly was even a hoax. Within this, there also has been a handful of USO, or unidentified submerged objects, being witnessed as well. Today I want to look at 3 of these sightings, along with 2 extra ones that I question the authenticity of, but I hope you will find these as fascinating as I do. Our first sighting comes to us from the Lunga Beach, and was reported on August 5th in 1974. 2 people were on the beach where they had set up camp. One of the people walked down to the shore to hunt for shellfish for their meal, when he suddenly noticed something odd about 2 to 3 miles out from the shore in the ocean. A large dark object was seen sticking out of the water, with what appeared to be several small objects flying around it, which he described as looking like dots. Originally he assumed the object was a boat or submarine, and the objects were actually helicopters flying around it, due to them traveling about the same speed as one. Thinking it odd, he left the shore and told his companion about what he had just witnessed. The 2 returned to the shore only to notice that the helicopter objects were gone, and the original object was rising from the waters and started hovering. After a few minutes, a glint of light was seen high in the sky above the object, and without warning, the craft shot off at a steep 90-degree angle towards the west in a high amount of speed. According to the report, the object, when half submerged, was said to be the width of a man's thumb on an outstretched arm, but when it was fully exposed, it appeared to be 8 to 10 times that size. It is also mentioned in this report that the 2 men were known to be credible, with one of them being involved in the aviation industry. On a side note, when first reading this report, I thought the men might have been seeing a whale carcass in the ocean with seagulls flying around it. But the whole takeoff aspect kind of ruins that idea. Also, the 90-degree takeoff bothered me, as from what I can figure, that simply would mean it went straight up, rather than any compass direction. After quick research, the Boeing 787 and similar ones can take off at a steep angle, most say 55 degrees, but apparently not 90 degrees. However, the same pattern could be used in description of flying at 90 degrees. I'd like to mention that this isn't the only sighting of a USO, with one being reported completely submerged on January 12, 1965, by a pilot named Captain Bruce Cathy, who was flying over the Kapara Harbor. Next up on our journey is an extremely eerie encounter that occurred on July 2, 2005, while a man and his daughter were driving home through the Hopis Valley near Marlborough. At around 6 o'clock in the morning, the 2 were driving through the mountains, and as they neared Netherwood Station, they noticed a strange oblong object with bright pulsating lights hovering over the nearby hills. According to the man, the lights illuminated in a pattern of red, blue, green, and white. As they continued to drive, the object suddenly made a beeline for them. The driver stated that the craft moved silently but at an incredible speed toward them, and the lights were now brighter than a helicopter's spotlight. The pair tried to evade the craft, but it kept up chase, only briefly disappearing behind hills, only to reappear above the car. At one point the man made a sharp turn, and they seemed to lose the tailing craft, only for it to suddenly appear right in front of them, its lights illuminating the whole valley. Out of fear, the man decided that the next house they came to, that they would stop and make a run for it inside. Oddly enough, the moment that opportunity arose, the craft disappeared from sight. The driver reported that he felt it almost seemed like the craft could read his thoughts and knew what he was planning, as well as him and his daughter both being terrified. With this, he stated that as the two continued on their trip home, the craft still followed them for about another half hour, but stayed quite a distance away. Finally, after they left the mountains, the pair lost sight of the craft and didn't see it again for the rest of their trip. In a strange twist, the man's daughter became ill over the next couple days with severe headaches, nausea, sore eyes, and a loss of appetite. The man felt fine, but attributed the illness to the UFO. He assumed that he didn't get sick since he was focused on the road and getting away, while his daughter kept staring at the object the whole trip. In my opinion, I've heard many cases of UFOs following cars, but normally the end result isn't good, as it usually leads to an abduction. The sickness is almost textbook from what many others have reported after their encounters as well. It truly is puzzling what the craft's intentions were and why it seemed to back off when it realized that the people inside the car were terrified. As previously stated, most encounters like this all state that the drivers of a UFO normally don't seem to care how the people were feeling. This is truly an odd case indeed. With our final entry of, dare I say, normal sightings, I must admit that I was going to include the Kokoda lights, as it is quite fascinating and almost reminiscent of the Phoenix lights. With that sighting, the objects seen were actually captured on camera and were visible on airport tower radar. But one of the first reported sightings is a bit more fascinating. I say this mainly because of the strange occurrence, as well as it seeming highly cut and dry as a true UFO encounter. This sighting happened in the June of 1956 in the area of Waipokarai near Hawke's Bay. This is an area you will hear from again shortly. According to the report, the event that took place involved a family on their farm and their 18-year-old daughter, who was the person who came forward with this information. On that night in June, the witness's father and brother were coming back from their wool shed when, while removing their boots, the pair saw an extremely bright light moving slowly over the Tukituki River near their property. In shock, the father called for his wife and daughter, but when they joined him, the light had disappeared. Thinking the men were just seeing things, the women went back into the house, only to hear the husband and son calling for them again. This time, they also saw the object moving above the river. Just as it was about out of sight, it quickly shot up in the sky a bit, and then just as quickly sped to the farm. The object stopped about 50 yards from the house and descended to about 20 feet off the ground. At this point, it was highly visible, and it appeared to be a silvery gray saucer-shaped craft that was the width of a car. Keep in mind, in 1956, cars were commonly a lot longer than they normally are today. The object was still emitting light, which was said to brighten up the farm's 4 acres of land like it was the daytime. Apparently, it was hovering over their dogs' kennels, which caused the dogs to howl and pull at their leashes. However, the nearby sheep seemed unbothered by the sight. Later, it was assumed that the craft was emitting a high-pitched noise that might have been bothering the dog's ears. Terrified by the sight, the daughter turned to her father for a rational explanation of what they were seeing, but in horror noticed that her entire family was almost frozen in place and seemed to be hypnotized by the object before them. After a few moments, the craft inexplicably shot straight up and stopped. Then it shot east and finally turned north and disappeared. Not long after it vanished, the rest of the family broke free of their trance, but couldn't remember anything outside of first seeing the craft land. Later, her father swore the family to secrecy for fear of being treated as outcasts in the community, but later he did tell his daughter that this wasn't the first time he saw strange things like that. One night, a while later, her father took her outside at night and showed her that on the nearby hills were similar objects near their neighbor's farm. But this time, there were 3 of them. I personally love this story as it has all the hallmarks of a great UFO sighting, especially when factoring the swearing to secrecy. To me, it seems somewhat similar to the 1955 Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, minus the possible metallic alien part. The first bonus report we have is said to have occurred in Manurewa on July 21st of 2017. According to the story, well, this is exactly why I'm leaving it in bonus territory, as very little background information is known other than this video clip that I'm showing you currently. The original video comes from a channel with the name UFO Fan, and according to him or her, this object has been recorded over a dozen times by this person. I checked out their channel and everything seems legit, but something just feels off to me. Here's a video from the same person, posted a month prior on June 9th, that seems to show a similar pattern, but this time it isn't on fire, and even ends with it turning into a shimmering metallic object. In my honest opinion, I feel this can go either one of two ways. Either this is a person who is working on crafting the best UFO sightings possible, where each time they add something new, i.e. the first was clouds and then the latter was with adding a fire effect. Or, and this is a big one, they have the most compelling evidence to date of something strange occurring in the sky. What makes me believe them is that they aren't pushing this out there with a sensational fashion. However, what bothers me is that no one else in their comment section who live in the area sees these things, and very little information is given about the person or the sightings. Mix this with the extremely shaky camera work and I start to get skeptical. As usual, I'll leave it up to you to decide, and if you happen to live in this area, have you seen something similar? The last bonus item I want to mention is that of an image captured on May 23, 2018 over Hawke's Bay. Now before going into this, I do want to mention that Hawke's Bay has a long history of UFO sightings and does seem to be a hotspot for activity, with reports going back to the 1950s. With this sighting, I'm not so sure that is what is going on here. The story is a little bit confusing, but apparently the image was captured by an unnamed student pilot of the Hawke's Bay Aerodrome while flying a Piper Tomahawk plane. However, a freelance photographer by the name of Tim Whitaker posted the images to his Facebook account. I know, getting stuck on a detail as to who actually took the photo may seem trivial, but when it comes to the paranormal and UFO encounters, the saying, "the devil was in the details," fits. Moving on, the day was apparently extremely windy, but this object seemed to move on its own power, even reportedly flying back and forth from one position to another, staying at about 2,000 feet above the ground. The report does say that an aircraft was sent up to investigate, but nothing is mentioned about what they found out. The object hung around for a while until it flew out of sight. In some of the reports, fellow students claimed to see flashing lights on the object. I hate to keep adding my personal thoughts, especially since I normally refrain from such activity, but two things bother me about this photo, and no, one of them isn't who took the picture. My first issue is that the object looks like a bunch of balloons tied together, but that doesn't rule anything out. My second issue, and this is a big one, is being it was seen near an airport, that couldn't someone have sent it up from the ground as a prank? The fact that no follow-up reports were made about what the second aircraft saw when it went to scout it out also hurts this for me. In closing, those were just a few of the UFO sightings that have occurred in New Zealand. I greatly urge you to look into the others if you have the time to do so. While researching this, I did find another USO sighting in Antarctica during Operation Deep Freeze, where a craft broke out of the ice that was 37 feet thick and shot off into the sky. But I may get into that at a later date. For now, I'm quite curious to hear from you which of the topics you found the most interesting from this mini-series about New Zealand. For me, I would have to say learning about the reported mosasaur population living off the coast was quite fascinating. Although, this shouldn't come as a shock to any of you, as I'm just a little bit biased towards the topics of cryptids. On a final thought, I've been considering something, and I'm interested in your input. Over the years, I've had quite a few sponsors, which started with Audible and currently am with the clothing company Into the AM. Each one has taught me a few things in regards to the business of advertising. Some good and some bad. Recently, YouTube mentioned utilizing the ability to provide merchandising for my channel. This isn't new to me, and I have considered this in the past, but I've always been resistant to the idea of pushing items to sell. Not to mention, I don't know if you have an interest in such a thing. A few of the items I'm considering should be in images I'm showing you currently. As of making this, I did place an order with the business to check their quality, and here in 10 days I should be getting a pen, a t-shirt, and 100 business cards. So when they arrive, I'll be posting pictures of the finished product on my social media, or maybe in a future video. Anyway, be sure to let me know if you'd be interested in some of these items related to my channel. As always, if you haven't yet done so, please consider subscribing for content similar to this, and also, I'd appreciate it if you could share my channel with someone who might find these topics interesting. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.